The planning committee of the NEST 29 Summit. I'm delighted to welcome you to this interactive panel on fostering a culture of innovation and creativity. It's one of the many interactive panels we'll be having, and one that I'm particularly excited about, not just because I'm moderating this session, but because it means a lot to me in the work I do. I am Adenike Adeyemi. I head Faith Foundation, Nigeria's foremost enterprise support organization that has been supporting aspiring and emerging Nigerian entrepreneurs over the last 23 years. But joining me today is also a very well-resourced panel of people who will bring in different perspectives to the conversations that we're going to have today. For those of us that were at the plenary session that we just finished, and also the introductory session, and particularly the scenario presentation that was given by Amina Mena earlier on, part of the things we talked about are what are the things that are critical for accelerating a potential $1 to $4 trillion economy over the next 10, 15 years. And very critical to those pathways is accelerating the growth of productive small and growing businesses, ensuring that our young people who have the capacity and the opportunities to also be able to create innovative businesses that they can start, or also have the pipeline to get into jobs that are decent jobs that also add value to the critical sectors of the economy. There are probably a few things that we're going to try to address in the next 60 to 70 minutes, but I know that my panel will also be able to do justice to that. With the way our session is going to flow, I'm going to welcome our chair and also our moderators. We will have our chair of our session do a context setting on the why of this topic, and also most importantly, what should we be addressing and what would a successful conversation look at the end of the day. After that, we'll have an interactive Q&A with our panelists. We will take some questions from the audience, so please do get your questions ready, and then we'll round up with also the chair rounding up the session. So please join me in, first of all, welcoming the chairman of our session, one who is a great partner within the ecosystem across various segments, and he is Mr. Abubakar Suleiman, the Managing Director, Chief Executive Officer of Sterling Bank, fondly known as Abu. You're welcome. Please take your seat. Also joining me on the panel is Mr. Obi Asika, convener of OmniServe and Omniverse, my apologies, who wears many hats across the creative value chain. You can start here, yes. Thank you. And right with him is Mr. Chinyenye Mba Uzoku, Managing Partner of Grand Central Africa, who also wears many hats, which we'll talk about shortly, but please welcome him to my panel. There's a big seat at the center. Please sit down. Yes, thank you. We also should be expecting any minute from now, hopefully, the new Director General of the Small and Medium Enterprises Development Agency of Nigeria, Mr. Charles Odi. So hopefully he joins us any minute from now, but once he comes in, we'll just tell him to join the panel. And then also joining me on the panel is Mr. Olumide Balogun, the Director for Google West Africa. Please join Chinenye. Okay, that's fine too. And so I am going to, I'll sit there. No, I'll sit there. Yes. We also should have online, okay, she's not. Okay, so we'll just take it as it. I'll move here, and then if we get Charles, I'll move shortly. We're trying not to have a manual, but it is what it is. So we'll have a conversation around inclusion and having gender lens, but that was never the intention. So hopefully Somachi joins in shortly. So our chair, I would like to invite you to please set the context for the conversations we're having. Can somebody please shut the door? We're having some noise from outside. I would like to invite you to please set the context for our conversations today and the important perspectives we need to consider and how we should round up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. To be honest, I didn't expect the room to be this full, so I came feeling very confident. Now the jitters are setting in. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm really glad that there's this much interest in this conversation. The way I like us to approach this conversation, starting from the topic we've chosen for ourselves, is to understand that innovation and creativity is how you change the productivity of any society. That at the bottom of it, the reason why innovation matters is so that we can take what is already there and make it much more valuable. And I say that because a lot of our conversation is going to go around the youth population. We're going to be talking around unemployment. We're also going to be talking about how well resourced we are. So if you talk about Nigeria, the conversation that comes up first, and I think this is increasingly the case, is that we have a very entrepreneurial and energetic youth population. Previously, it used to be we're a well-resourced country. So our conversation was about natural resources. And when you start to do an audit of what those natural resources are, you would find, for instance, that both in the agricultural and the mining sector, just about any input you need to create the things we need in modern society exists in some form around Nigeria. And in many cases, in generous forms, and that are easily accessible. Where the best example is that a lot of the agrarian land in Nigeria, the cost to make them, turn them into farms is far lower than what you have in many other places, right? And then you move away from things like the availability of natural resources. You now move into our population, the marketplace. Again, a lot of the challenges that people face is, even if you could innovate, if you can't get it into the market, then you don't stand a chance. If the cost of innovating and getting it into the market is significantly high, then you also will struggle to compete with those who are nearby. So if you're here, you have the natural resource abundance, then you've got the marketplace. And that marketplace is about to expand further to the rest of Africa with the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. So you've got a market that is right at your doorstep. And then you move away from that and you say, okay, what are the other things that potentially we have? You've got the entrepreneur. So if you remember the factors of production, the way we were taught, you've got land, you've got labor, and then you've got this little thing called capital. And then you now come back and then you start to wonder, why then with all of this are we struggling to begin to innovate and create productivity? The first thing that comes to mind is that innovation does not happen in isolation. In other words, no matter how intelligent your idea is, if the system that will support you to implement or to execute doesn't exist, then the cost of innovation becomes unbearable. So you no longer have to innovate in the space you're staring at. When you come up with the idea, even the prototyping, you don't have a system that support prototyping. And so this idea of think as wide as you can, then test, and then make adjustment is not possible. You almost have to have a perfect idea because the cost of prototyping could be the end of you. And even if you successfully prototype and you then don't have an ecosystem that can deliver the product to market, then what you find you're doing is that you are simply creating ideas, IPs that then get outsourced to other countries to produce. So you may get some IP value, but you don't get the manufacturing value, you don't get the ecosystem value. This is the context, and the last item, or the second to last item that I would then highlight is that in that ecosystem, there is also what I would call the bureaucratic value chain. In other words, if you have all of this in considered, but the government itself does not support the process for innovation, then the cost of innovation becomes very high, right? So on one side, we've got this amazing resource, human resource, capital resource. On the other side, we've got these deficiencies, I would like to call them, the last of which is what I would call the appropriateness of the skill sets. So it's not an education issue. It is, do we have the kind of skill set that is required to unlock value? So if you think about what I've laid out, I've talked about the potential value or benefit that will come from innovation and from the entrepreneurial ecosystem. I've also highlighted some of the challenges that we will face when we try to do this. The thinking is that when we're done, beyond the resource abundance and the system limitation, I would like us to refresh. In other words, let's remind ourselves why this is so important. Why, if you were to do one thing as a government, this is probably the one that will give you the most value for money, because of the level of readiness for this to take off if you get it right. And then after refreshing, I want us to reflect on what is standing in our way. In other words, now that we know that this is a very valuable thing to do, the message we want to put before our audience is we know the why we're not moving forward. And then after that, then let's then rethink how we can take this forward. In other words, what are the things that the government, the private sector, or the industry, as we call them, the academia, and the development agencies that have become a fundamental part of our reform, what is it that each one of these need to do such that when we come back in the year's time, the culture of innovation and creativity will be something we can measure. We see a measurable improvement in all of that. So let's refresh, let's reflect, and let's rethink, and hopefully we'll be able to give something to the audience, and obviously to those who would make the right policies to move us forward. Thank you.
Great. So we only have 2 mics, so we'll sort of share it here. Thank you very much, our chairman, for that. So on that context, and given the direction we've been given on how to approach our conversations, I'm going to start with you, Chinenye. If you can perhaps give us a view of what our innovation ecosystem currently looks like in Nigeria, and to what extent, because we're having conversations around the education sector, innovation, the entrepreneurship ecosystem, and technology. So can you just sort of paint to us, very high level, and you can be very visual, we've seen your presentations and speeches, what the innovation ecosystem looks like in Nigeria, and the role the education sector or framework has played to that, to how it looks now. Thank you.
Well, thank you. How many hours do we have?
No, you have 3 minutes maximum, and I'm timing you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. This topic, I think, is something I actually believe in. I just want to say this out there. This should actually be a plenary, and I think we need to have like many hours to actually unpack this, because this was critical to what's going to happen to us in the future. I would say that, and I kind of like sat when Abu was talking. I don't know if you guys saw him looking at me. He was saying all these things. Don't was the subject. So I will start with what I shouldn't do, which is to upset everyone. And it always begins with the numbers. And I actually always start with the numbers, because I think numbers are what allow us to plan a future, and to do so in a pragmatic manner. And shout out to Alicia and Olamide for almost like taking away some of my angst earlier on. I just kind of like said to them that the 2 sectors that are global in Nigeria, that are built around innovation, are the 2 sectors that did it without government. And so the question then is, what role should government then have? And how do we then manage? Because really this is all about, it's about managing government's involvement in the sectors where innovation actually is a core driver. And doing so in such a way that the government doesn't become the elephant and the bull in the china shop. And that's really difficult to do, to stop government from doing what it tries to do, which is to govern. Because in Africa, govern means hold, control, contain. Whereas what it should mean is enable, empower, free, for people to actually achieve their full potential. So what do the numbers tell us? The numbers tell us that we are, quote unquote, 200 million people, but the numbers also tell us that this 200 million economy is an economy that is being shaken by the departure of about 150,000 people every year under the so-called Japa syndrome. So the Institute of Migration has a study that says that only about 150,000 Nigerians leave annually from this country. And so you have to ask yourself, and this is the number over the past 20 years. So if in the past 20 years, we have never exceeded 1% of the population in terms of migration, what's happening to the other 99%? And that, I relate that directly to the land that Abu was talking about. So we have productive, fertile land that is lying fallow. And you have 99% of your people, apparently, who are not really contributing much. People like Oswald and the rest of them who for some reason or the other, they're still here. If they, so I'm kind of like worried. I mean, how can 1% of your population leave and literally your banking sector comes to a halt? So it tells you something that we do have the number, but do we have the assets there? So the capital, what makes it capital is that you can actually deploy it. And to make our own assets, turn that into capital and be able to deploy it to drive innovation, a couple of things need to happen. First of all, innovation is not an event. Innovation is a capability. And so when it happens, we highlight the event. There was innovation in this space, innovation in this space, but it doesn't happen just like, you snap your fingers. It's a capability that has to be built. And countries that are growing based on innovation actually know how to measure, harness, and direct and multiply and accelerate innovation as a national capability. Do we have it in our country? Maybe innate, but we don't have a national capability for innovation as something that you can actually manage. And so that's the first step. Until you have that, you can't actually grow it. The second thing is, where does that actually begin? Where do you begin to build innovation as a national capability? We have an innate in our DNA, an aggressively entrepreneurial, aspirational young population. So the ingredients are there. How do you translate that into innovation as a national capability? It happens through the education system. And this system has collapsed over the past 40 years. And with due respect to all those who manage it, including myself, we are in deep trouble and we're still digging deeper into the hole. And why do I say that? I say that because when you go back to the numbers, we have 1% of our population in tertiary education, 1%. That's 2 million in a country of 200 million in all tertiary institutions in Nigeria. You have 540,000 in technical and vocational education when there should be 10 million. We have no labs in any of our schools, and a single lab now is about 150 million naira to build. So we have a mass of young people, entrepreneurial, yes, fully capable of all sorts of things. But the system, which is the education system that should actually convert that from just an asset into capital, has failed. So we must find a way to radically transform that engine. The factory of the 21st century is between our ears. It's in the mind. And unless we're able to go that and rebuild that industrial capability through the education system, then we have a problem. So what does the landscape look like? I think what we're seeing are a couple of trees that are very big trees with huge canopies, but at the bottom, there's very little happening. And the worst part about this story and this analogy, when you have a big tree with a large canopy, the sun only goes to that tree. It doesn't get down to the bottom. And if the sun doesn't get down to the bottom, then clearly the underbrush is going to remain so. So we have to trim those trees to allow the sun get down and allow the weeds to grow.
Fantastic analogy. Thank you. In curating this session, one of the sectors that was very important, and both the chairman and Chinenye referred to them as the sectors that have really helped in showing the potential that we have, technology and creativity. And using Chinenye's analogy of trees, Niger to the world, everything, clothes, fashion, food, design, technology, film, there's so much opportunity it appears that there are quite a lot of trees in the creative value chain. Obi, can you just share, just very briefly, is it all we see? And is there more to do? What are we missing in understanding the opportunity so that it's not just all the buzz that we're saying?
Thank you. I think it's funny. I don't want to be come on a down note, right? Because a lot of times when we talk about the creative industries, the music, the fashion, this is where the good news is, right? But I think one of the things that happens and has happened historically in Nigeria is that people look at those things as vocations. They don't look at them as occupations. They haven't looked at them as professions. And therefore, they've undervalued what these things are. And to speak to something that Abu was talking about earlier and that Chinenye has sort of mentioned, I think the most important thing to understand is that we're in the age of ideas, right? You're in the age of ideas. Ideas don't just rule the world, they make the world. They make all the new businesses. So innovation is about the ability to also reimagine. And I think perhaps the biggest thing we have is that we're blessed with millions of talented young storytellers. And these storytellers are working across multiple spaces. It's not just music. So as a storyteller, you could be a visual artist, you could be a copywriter, you could be a poet, right? A fashion designer, somebody doing food. But what has happened, and technology has enabled this massively, is to give us distribution and disruption. Because before new media and social media, nobody from this part of the world had the opportunity or the capital, go back to that word capital, to break into new markets. So even today, if you talk to Nollywood people, they're complaining about Netflix capping them in terms of budgets. But at the same time, Netflix is only spending money in 2 African countries. So they only actually, Nigeria is one of the few places that has a global story that can globalize, right? But when you ask who's investing in the Nigerian story, it's not Nigerians. Except the very few small, some of us entrepreneurs who've backed this thing for 20 years. Nigerian corporates, Nigerian enterprise, Nigerian government has been basically sidestepping Nigerian soft power. So the Nigerian story, the African story, has apparently not been important to African governments, Nigerian governments, and our own people. And if you treat something as if it's unimportant, you can't expect the world to actually take it for what it's supposed to be, right? So for me, the opportunity that Nigeria has is in understanding that its biggest asset are the people, right? I think the biggest asset we have are our people. The biggest challenge we have is how to scale up the skills, right? Because the truth of the matter is most of the people working in the creative industries and economies are working from intuition. So it's not necessarily that they were actually trained in that particular thing they're doing. A guy was playing video games yesterday, today he's an editor. But there was no process that put him through. And we have a shortage of those resources at the highest level. But the opportunity, truly, this sector can definitely deliver 10 to 20 million jobs. But gigs, not necessarily 9 to 5. People that work for themselves can work everywhere, locally, globally. But this sector is the sector as far as I'm concerned. I'm biased, maybe.
We know. A round of applause, please. Yeah. And what I'm doing now is just setting the context, and then we'll now start going into the vision setting for the next round of questions. So, Olu, I think that if we look at this, we have a new administration that has come in, and if anybody, when you ask who are the ministers that are working, they'll say the minister overseeing the sector that you operate in. And maybe because there's, to some extent, a clearer vision, strategy on what the roadmap for that sector is. So again, you are operating, you're leading one of the largest tech companies within the space that has different platforms that a lot of the young people, a lot of our young people, a lot of us anyway, have used to monetize, make money, be entrepreneurial, reskill ourselves. What is the gap that you see? How would you compare Nigeria positioning in the tech space and the potential that we're yet to achieve based on where you sit and in the role you oversee?
The gap. I think if you consider, so there's something called the Digital Spinners Report. I don't know how many of us have seen it, but it talks about the fact that there's 16 emerging economies, of which Nigeria is one of them, they're currently contributing about 19% to the internet population growth globally. But these economies only contribute 7% to real GDP growth. So you see that there's some dissonance there in terms of the fact that we're not growing as fast as we should be. I think that's something it's important, and we should talk about that, because when we talk a lot about tech, and even Obi talks about it, he says something to that effect as well. How do you define a startup? Right? I think in a way we've kind of defined startups as these guys who are kind of programming on a computer and developing solutions, and that's what a startup is. But the creative sector has startups, so I think that there's a little bit of a mismatch there in terms of how we define it. But in any case, what you see is that we're not going fast enough. I think is the first thing. There's just not enough access, right? Access to the internet is something that is right now not at the level that it should be. We say we're 200 million people in this country. Huge amount of them are young people. and I want to be honest, for all of us in this room, we're some of the time we're a little bit in a bubble. You know, we live in a little bit of a bubble. I saw a video online and they were asking us questions. I think Oswald was in that as well, where they said, what would you do with 1,000 naira? And they were like, oh geez, these guys don't, like, you know, somebody said, is there data for 1,000 naira? So there's a lot of people that live outside of our bubble who want just to get 1,000 naira to get the cheapest or the affordable internet is not possible for them. I think too, there's a huge number of people who accessibility to device. I mean, if you think about the way we buy devices in the country, for the most part, you need to dole out the money all at once, right? Whereas in other climates, you can pay over a period of time. So one, the costs are way too high. The average selling price is way too high for what is you know, affordable for a large number of people. Secondly, is they cannot afford the data as well. And the third thing that I'm very passionate about, the folks at Google will tell you this, is languages. Everybody doesn't speak English. We have to remember. We have to remember this. So when you look at economies that are taking advantage of this internet growth, they have been able to get their key languages online, so people can consume those languages. And when I talk about languages, I'm not talking about the fact that you know, when I speak with my team some of the time, they tell me like, oh, you know what, we have 100 languages, but I'm like, no, not scripted, because the people didn't learn those languages scripted. They learned those languages listening. So we have to be able to make sure that those languages are something that the surface, whatever that device is, can speak the language to them. One, they can speak the language to the device. There's natural language processing, understanding that happens, and we can give them the results in a language of their choice. So those are some of the gaps that we see that makes it, when you talk about platforms, it makes it difficult for people to approach these platforms to actually get the benefit that the platform accrues, because some of those gaps are there. Everything from access, as I said, you know, to languages. The third thing that I would say is, you know, I just think that, you know, policy is also something that I know we're going to dig deeper into, but what kind of enabling policies essentially are there to help, you know, make these things more ubiquitous, more accessible? Both for the platform providers, you know, as well as the infrastructure that runs on it, whether that is a you know, telecommunications network. You know, I think those things are things that are critical for us to be able to bridge the gap. I want to talk about skilling, but I know that, you know, we're going to cover skilling in a little bit more detail later. So those will be like the top points that come to mind.
Thank you very much, Olu. Thank you. A round of applause, please. About 20 years ago, I saw a study. It was actually run in Ife, I think probably in the 1980s. And they had a control group of students from a primary school close to OAU that they taught them in Yoruba. They used Yoruba as the language of study from primary 1 to 6. And the educational attainment in senior secondary school education was way higher than any of the other persons. So there's quite a lot to even be further explored with that. So education. How do we revision our education sector? We've talked a lot about skilling, capacity building. You've talked about how we have a very low transition to tertiary, but there should also be a high focus to technological, vocational education and capacity building. But people do not appreciate it. People do not want anybody that is in a vocational school, so to speak, or TVET has done JAMB, didn't pass it, then did poly JAMB. In fact, it's even worse for people in colleges of education. So what's the rethinking that needs to happen in terms of our current education structure? And I'm also saying this bearing in mind that the NESG has something called the Triple Helix Roundtable, which I know you're familiar with. And for those of us that do not know, the Triple Helix Roundtable is made up of people in academia, private sector, public sector, coming together to find ways to intervene in the curriculum, and also trying to design curriculum that speaks to, you know, what should be our needs or the needs of the future. So, Chineye.
So first of all,
you have a conflicting view.
Well, yeah, sometimes I do. I know it wasn't 20 years ago, because it would have been 2.
No, I found out about the study.
Okay, sure. So, my first impulse is to say we should just stop thinking, you know, and just get things done. And that's because we've been thinking for a long time, and see where we are.
What do we need to get done?
Okay, so what we need to get done? I think there are a few things that are almost like immediate. one of them is that we need to accept the reality that education doesn't happen within the four walls of a classroom. And once we accept that, then it opens up completely the opportunities for education. And currently what we're doing is that if you think of our population and there are 60 million children, let's just say for purpose, my math is really bad. Let's just say there are 40 million people who need to go to school every day. And a classroom has a limit of 40 students, right? As supposed to be the national standard, 40 students per class. It means we need to build 1 million classrooms, and we'll never build those 1 million classrooms. We'll also never build the labs that we spoke about. You know, we just have to accept some things are gone and gone forever. It isn't possible for this country to say we're going to spend 500 to 600 million naira on each school to provide 3 labs in pure sciences and 1 in technology. That's never going to happen, and we should never even go there. We now have to assume, and again, I wanted to refer to a report, Google's reports on the, Google Africa's reports on the developer workforce, I think it was 2021 or something. I mean, we saw a transition. We only added 5,800 developers to Nigeria's professional labor force in 1 year, 5,800. How does that power an industry? It's completely impossible. All over, and this is like data that Google was so kind to have done the study. So we have to ask ourselves what Obi said, how do we scale? We're not talking about leapfrogging, we're talking about exponential growth. The only way that can happen is by introducing the one thing that we all think they talk about, but we don't do, and we must do so with a bit of a conscience, which is, it's only technology that is a catalyst, an accelerator, and a multiplier. It's the one thing in this world that has those 3 vector quantities, those 3 vector characteristics. And so once you drop technology in any environment, it's going to catalyze change. It will accelerate the pace of change, and it will multiply it in a way that nothing else does. And so if we know we need to create the workforce, we should be thinking to ourselves, how does technology land in our education space and totally and completely disrupt it? And the first realization is that technology happens every time you have a device in your hand. And so once you have a device in your hand, you're in university. If you look at the data as well that is looking at, talking about how even the workforce that we have today, that same report and others that have come after it have said that over 60% of the people who actually acquired those skills not in the classroom in the universities, but outside. So it means people are going online. Our vision as a society should be that every single person can go to school whenever they want, at their own pace, wherever they may be, anywhere in Nigeria. It's a very simple thing. Once we accept that as a standard, kind of like not even a mantra, but just like almost like a mandate that we have to say, every single Nigerian who wants to learn should be able to learn wherever they are, whenever they want, and at their own pace, in their own way, then it opens up a world of opportunity. And it literally means that the lady who is, or the guy who is the receptionist, who is in between hours and has 30 minutes, goes to school. The kid who is in the village, who doesn't have ability because of security to go into a school environment, should be able to go to school. Once we accept that, then our goal should be, how then do we deploy 200 million devices? And what is that going to cost us? Certainly the cost of deploying 200 million devices is going to be less than the cost of building schools. But we're not going to do that because we're still thinking. And because we're still thinking, we're going to go out and build another 10 universities that will have 5,000 students. And instead of going to the online thing, Indira Gandhi National Open University has more Nigerian students than all the Nigerian universities put together. Yeah, so I mean, so, and a nation just does a simple thing. Once you've agreed that, then you then cast your mind forward and say, 10 years from now, we would have allowed every single person who wanted to get an education to upskill themselves in one way or the other. And we would have done so in a manner that then gives us a chance to actually compete at a global level. But why is that not possible? It's not possible because we're still thinking. You know, everybody who comes in starts to rethink. There's a new roadmap, a new this, a new this, a new that. It's simple. Give the people devices. And I know from actual deployments that you don't need to put a device with an internet connection in anybody's hands. I was in India 2013. India made a decision, and I've told this story before, and I'm sorry if I'm saying it again, but it's a very simple story. In 2013, India decided that they realized that they had 600 million people without any education at all. 600 million without any education at all, and that this was going to be a huge burden on their society. They also had, at the time, about 18 million students in university in tertiary education. So they said to themselves, well, if everybody buys an iPad at $600, if 1 million of us buy iPads, or 10 million of us buy iPads, it means that we will have spent $6 billion on iPads. So they said, why don't we make our own iPad? They designed the iPad, their own version of the iPad, which is a tablet, an Android tablet. Realized they didn't have the manufacturing capability to scale. So they took the design and they took it to China. And what came back was this device called the Ashcash, which was landing in India at the cost of $60. And the government was subsidizing that by $30 and giving to every student. It was a clunky machine, didn't have fancy graphics and all that sort of stuff, but on that device, it had enough memory to take an entire Encyclopedia Britannica, could sit on that, interactive lessons, everything. And so their vision was, this $6 billion that we would have spent buying the iPad, we will spend $600 million and we will get every single person a device over a period of time, and they lift the entire nation. What is so difficult for us as a country to be able to take a simple decision like that and implement it? And I will end by saying, we currently buy in Nigeria about 63 million phones every year.
Well, who are the people that buy this phone?
Nigerians. 63 million
Percentage of
phones.
the population.
We buy 63 million phones every year. And these 63 million phones, not a single one is assembled in Nigeria. How can you be talking about internet penetration and digital whatever, when the total manufacturing or assembling capacity of devices in this country for tablets is under 200,000 a year? So what does a country need to do? Stop thinking. The plan has been there for 30 years. Invest aggressively in building your own devices. I'm not saying you're going to learn anything. You just learn how to assemble them. Build an entire ecosystem and distribute those things. And make sure in the process that every single mother gets a device, because a child would educate himself or herself to the level of the mother and above, not the father. If you put a device in the hands of a mother, an entire family and generations will be transformed. Give the women the devices and let every mother have a device, and decade from now.
Thank you. Thank you, Chinwe. Very self-explanatory. A lot of what you said, though, has a lot of aspects of capital and financing. We're very broke as a country, and most of the sessions we just had today has spoken about that. Thankfully, in this room, there are captains of industry also present with cash. So, Obi, my next question is to you, is to where and how do we direct financing and capital for your sector or cross-board?
Well, I think the first thing is to understand that the issues that there are in the creative economy are the same issues there are for all people in Nigeria. So I think one of the mistakes that people do is creating these silos, tech, creatives, culture. It's all the same people. The people in the creative economy, you're probably looking at the creative and cultural industries, you're looking at between 26 and 40 industries. So the skill sets are wide, right? But the base level of those skill sets is what everybody needs. That's digital skills, how to use the thing, how to run your business. All those basic things are the basic level that is needed by everybody. I'd go a bit further than Chinwe, possibly, because I'm not as civilized as he is. But in the sense that I think that beyond even just taking the decision, you have to set ambitious targets, right? We keep talking about being big, the African giant. But the reality is we're punching way below our weight. If we were just being real to ourselves, 200 million people, what are we producing, yeah? And the embarrassing thing about it is, and I'll tell you the honest truth, all the soft power explosion is happening in spite of Nigeria. It's not happening because of Nigeria. And that is very painful. because what it means is that, and that's why when you see your talent all international all the time, is because they're not able to monetize at home. So, and your biggest market is always your home market. So if I'm spending half my time in New York or in London, it's not because I prefer it, it's because they can pay me. If I'm sitting in Lagos and you can't pay me, it's not just because of buying power, as people think sometimes. That's not the core issue. The core issue is disconnected markets within our own economy. So as you're sitting here, one thing I like to say is you're talking about things that we'd like to see done, right? A big way to move a lot of things forward for me that I think about all the time is if you look at our traditional markets in Nigeria, the street markets, Alaba, Idumota, Computer Village, all these places, right? I obsess over this stuff. I'm like, I think it's about 30, I'm not an economist, but it's 30 to 40 billion dollars a year going on in those markets right now. They're all offline. Nobody sitting here can put on their phone and show me a shop in any of these markets. That's crazy. Meanwhile, Alibaba and Amazon are coming into Nigeria. So we're all going to sit here and allow them to eat everything, and then we're going to be complaining in 5 years. Why? We're thinking about it, exactly. So my word would be that if you're talking to the bankers and the finance people, these are key places to invest, right? Bringing those markets online is critical, right? Investing in mass upskilling of Nigerians, and I'm talking like 10 million Nigerians. I think Nigeria should be targeting 2 to 3 million a year for the next 5 years. If you get to 2030 and you've skilled up 15 million Nigerians, that multiplier effect will be seen by everybody, and we will. And then, you know, sometimes I have a running joke with the guys at PwC. Every year they do their report on the creative industries and all the numbers, and those of us in the thing are like, bro, this $25 billion, where is it? You know, if you can show me where it is, I'll move to that place, right? So it's like, but if we actually have these key investments, education, upskilling, bring these markets online. So stop thinking about these things as separate issues. It's bring Nigeria online, give the skills to Nigerians, and understand that the only way you grow this country is to invest in the Nigerians. Because everything else is just hubris. It's just hype. You're just literally just talking to yourself because the people are not paying attention anymore. Because the people are gone. Technology is right there in their hand, so they don't have to listen to us. They just say, what's he saying? I made 10,000 naira the last 1 hour doing whatever I'm doing on my phone. And what we have to find is how can we be relevant in that world? Because you know, right now, apart from being in the age of ideas, you're in the attention economy. How long can you keep somebody's attention for? Can you keep them for 2 minutes? If you can keep them for 2 minutes a day, you might become a dollar millionaire. Because that 2 minutes is hard, right? And that's why when you find out, you see people in social media trying to project new images for themselves, it's always based on that single thing, attention, right? So for me, the key investment is in the people, and the key investment is in education, but it's not just random education, it's skills. Skills that convert to work, because the truth of the matter is we want to put people to work.
Yes.
That's the most important
Thank you.
thing.
So Lou, skills that convert to work, how do you then get that to happen in a scale, given the large numbers that we have?
But I think it's important for us to think about what drove that, right? Why do we have a culture today of young people? I mean, you go to the mall, you see people like with their seeds out, right? Trying to show us a seed in your face. So that entrepreneurial spirit is there. It's definitely happening in the creative space. It's not happening as much in the STEM space as I would like to call it. How do we foster that culture? Number one is, you know, culture is what you accept. It's not what you write down. So for example, if we're accepting of the fact that, you know, we spend what we spend on education at the moment, which I think is about between 5 and 6% of our, if we're accepting of that, and we know that skilling is critical, then we're building a culture that projects that education is not important. And that's just the truth. things that we're missing today. Because the education system is very good at teaching you how to become a crammer. Like you can just take it in and pour it down. And you get a first class, but you can't solve a single problem. And I think that is something that we have to infuse into our structured education system. So that's one. I think two is when the public schools go, like where did they go? And we think about it coming all the way from primary to secondary, and now when Commander states, if you want to be honest, right? I think with our universities and with our colleges, so we have to inject funding. We need to have a vision of where we want to be. I really believe we can be the youth innovation capital of the world. And when I say this all the time, people say, oh, you know what, Olumide, do you want to start with Africa? And I'm like, that's a low bar, right? That's a low bar. How about we think about being the youth innovation capital of the world? Because if you think about what we've achieved over the last, 10 odd years, in spaces like the Great Space is one that I look to a lot. And I think about how do we apply some of these learnings that we've gotten from there, into the STEM space. The final thing that I would say is we need to spotlight folks and reward them for problem solving. Not come after them with taxes. Right? And I think that's something that is very, how do we think about creating an enabling environment for problem solvers to solve problems? Because one of the reasons why we can look at Nigeria today and say, oh, you know what, we've got a lot of problems. But if we had a culture of people who are problem solvers, they'll be embracing that. That's a great opportunity, right? And even in the startup space today, I ask startup founders a lot, are you in this to solve problems ultimately? Or are you in it to be popular, to make money? And there's nothing wrong with making money. But the problem is that when you make the first $1 million in dollars, because $1 million you could very quickly throw away, the desire to solve problems, the desire to scale on that problem, and to solve a bigger problem. And I think the more that we build this kind of cultures and spotlight this kind of talent, then what happens is that you have every young person saying, that is who I want to be. I want to tell a quick story, and I know we should only spend 2 minutes.
30 seconds.
Okay, 30 seconds. So a few years ago, it must have been about 10 years ago, I just said, I want to go and teach in schools. So I was teaching in Victoria Island Secondary School, just beside the Mobile. Went to school, I started teaching SS2 students. So I took permission from the office, I'll go once a week, teach SS2 students math. And I asked them the very first day when I said, how many of you know how much someone who works in this building just beside you, how many of you know what they earn, what their earning power is? And none of them could tell me. I said, how many of you know how much impact the work that they do does to drive? And none of them could tell me. But then I asked a question, how many of you know, at the time I think it was maybe Divanj or something who was up on the thing. And everyone knew Divanj, and everyone knows what his last car was, and that right there is a problem because there's no balance. And I did, taught at school for a year or thereabout. Hopefully changed a few things in terms of how they saw the world. But I think those are the things that are critical, is how do we spotlight? Because now when everyone talks about being an entrepreneur, it's like you are much better than folks who are like working at the 9 to 5. And
Thank
those
you.
are the things that we need to change over time.
Thank you.
Even the entrepreneurs are going to need people to work.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you. So I understand we have Charles online. Can we switch to him, please? Charles, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Fantastic. So we're here to see your feedback.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Very well, thank you.
I hope you've. Yes. Can you go on?
Can you hear me?
Hello, Charles.
Hello, Charles. Yes, can you hear me?
There's a feedback from your end. Yes, there's someone whose device is on, who is also joining online, and it may be at the back. Hello? Okay, the feedback has stopped. Charles, can you say something?
Hi.
Fantastic, great. So, I hope you can still hear us. We can't see you again. Technology. Hi, Charles, can you still hear me? Okay, so we'll try and get him back. Last round of questions while we'll still get Charles, and then we'll come to the audience. We probably will not be able to take more than 3 questions. So now we have a new administration that has hit the ground running. We've had very powerful statements this morning. What will be your one, each of the 3 of us, what will success look like in 4 years for this administration? Just one area that you want them to focus and dig their heels on. Just one policy area that over the next 4 years you want them to implement. Chineye.
Oh man. So one thing. I feel that we need to recognize there's a challenge that's in front of us that we all need to come to an agreement on, and it's not really about government. The government, at the end of the day, government can take this decision, but it can't take it without us. And let me, if you don't mind, just let me quickly explain. So, why are we able to export our people unwillingly to other countries if they're not good? There's a certain alchemy that's taking place in our education system where we're producing gold out of nothing, quote unquote, if we're to believe that there's nothing, because our students and our graduates are in demand abroad. And yet we say that the universities and education system is bad. Something is inside that system that is producing people who are employable abroad. They're not perfect. When they go there, they go and they do some extra training, then they go into medicine. But think about it this way. If your daughter gets into university of whatever, a public university, to study medicine, she's going to pay about 60,000 naira. Or now they've revised it to 150,000. So let's say it's 150,000 that she pays, and she pays 150,000 times the 6 years, right? So that's about 900,000 naira. It's under 1 million naira. And she graduates from university with a degree in medicine, and at the cost of 900,000 naira. So by let's just make it 1 million, just to make the math easy. So essentially, she's gotten an education as a medical doctor for how much? Is it $1,000? So, yeah. So this same person goes abroad, spends 2 years, and becomes, certified to practice medicine in a country where her equivalent was educated at the cost of $450,000. I don't know if you get the numbers, and please, I'm making some wild, some broad, but just think about it this way. You're producing a professional, technical talent at the cost of $1,000, and this person is going abroad to go and work in competition with somebody who was produced in that system at the cost of $450,000. The logic is clear. So long as we continue to run this our system at $1,000, we will continuously be producing capital to send abroad, because capital labor will always find where it maximizes its value. It's always going to be easier for them to hire your people and train them up over 1 or 2 years than it is for them to produce more of their people. So we started with medical doctors, we went into technology, and now we've gone down to, we went to nurses, now we've gone to teachers, and now we are going to minders in classroom, and carpenters. My mechanic is leaving at the end of this month to go to Canada to go and become to go and work in Canada, because he's Japan too, because they're looking for him. And guess what? They've already structured a job for him. He's just an excellent car mechanic, but he's not even going to work as a mechanic. He's going to work as a payloader, kind of like driver or something. But he's going to earn more money there than he can get working as a top class mechanic in Lagos. There's something fundamentally right and at the same time wrong with our system. What should government be focusing on? I think we all as Nigerians should understand that education costs money. And if we want to educate a really large number of people to build the human assets, then we have to do one of two things or even both. We have to get comfortable with paying for the education, but what should government do? Government needs to find a way to radically transform the economic model on which we run our schools today, our education system today, and bring the cost down to a level that that Nigerians can afford. There's no point asking people to pay 1 million naira for an education that they cannot afford. And there's no point giving them a student loan that they will not pay back over the next 40 years if they can even access it. We have to change the economic model for schooling, and the way to do that is via technology. That is what brings down, radically transform the cost of gaining an education, and it's already working, and it's working successfully. Hence, all these great guys who are making money sitting in Enugu and earning $10,000 a month in Abuja here. They're working as a data analyst and earning $6,000 a month here in Abuja, working offshoring. Recognizing what already exists and what is currently working is what we must do. That's what I mean, stop thinking. The data is there, the evidence is there. There's a clear model that's available for us. We just have to agree to double down on it. We can't change the fundamentals in terms of getting people to pay for the high quality, pay a lot of money for an education, but we can fundamentally disrupt the model of education itself, the economic model of it, and make it accessible to as many people as is possible. So that's the number one thing.
Yes.
Fiscal and monetary policy. And hopefully it doesn't take 4 years. We need to be able to say what is our naira going to be valued at in the next 6 months. It's just important. Because when you think about it, right, we do need funding. If you think about the startup space, Nigeria is doing 10% of the total funding that comes into Africa. So somewhere between 200 and 250 billion. But I think we're currently at 5 of 7. Oswald, correct me if I'm wrong, we're about 5 of 7 of the unicorns are sitting here in Nigeria. So that says that we can do a lot more if we could get a lot more of that funding. But that funding is not going to come if folks can't get their money. So if there was one thing, and this thing is like this, it's a domino effect, right? You want funding to fund things like skilling, to fund things like the innovation. We know we're not going to do that locally. No country in the world does that locally. But if the funding is to come in, this money is not owned by NGOs, right? It's owned by business people who are thinking about how their capital essentially is going to get return on investment and how they're going to be able to take that out. I think it's critical. And for those who are even here, I mean, everyone today is earning less than they earned 5 years ago. It's incredible.
Last year.
Right?
Months ago.
So I think that it will have to be fiscal and monetary policy. Grateful to see that there's a lot that's going on in the stage right now, and with the new administration, and it's in focus. But I think that's one that we really need to get a handle on.
Thank you. The next plenary happening at Congress Hall is FDI ready, and it will speak specifically to investment, getting us really retooling our investment climate. Thank you, Obi.
Yeah, well, let's imagine that the first 2 requests from them have happened, and so I can have the added request, which would be that I would want to see the Nigerian government intentionally back the Nigerians, right? If you make Nigerians number 1 in your policy, not the oil and gas, not the minerals under the ground, the people of this country have basically been ignored for the last 50 years, I would say. They've been incidental. They've just been like this incidental data stat. So we're not actually engaging that. The biggest value lies within those people. If you focus on those people, if you activate our mythology, if you activate our heritage and our culture, just with technology alone, you're talking multi-billion dollars. If you look at gaming, right? The gaming industry can affect education. It can bring the mythology to life. I was telling somebody, Assassin's Creed, I don't know if there are any gamers in here, there's a game called Assassin's Creed. During the pandemic, it became absolutely massive. Maybe did $1 billion of revenue. And one of the things that happened, they spent $500 million creating a virtual tour. In these virtual tours, you can go to Thebes, you can go to Rome, you can go to Greece, and you can go to ancient Egypt. So ancient Egypt is the only place in Africa we can travel to virtually. Why can't we travel to Benin, Ife, Nok? Why can't we bring our essence to the world? This is an essence that Disney, Netflix, the whole world is looking for. We are still running away from it. We were talking about it before, and I was saying this thing, I have to say it again, I keep saying it. What's the difference between Thor and Shango? You know, the Nigerians say, oh, it's packaging, it's just packaging. I say, no, you abandon Shango outside Lagos. Thor is approaching $50 billion. So who's dumb? We pride ourselves on being hyper intelligent, but we refuse to engage our biggest asset, ourselves and our essence.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. So just before the questions, please can you join me in welcoming Mr. Charles Odi, our new Director General for the Small Medium Enterprise Development Agency of Nigeria. He was just invited yesterday or 2 days ago, so very short notice, as we will be too. And I think that you're coming in at a good time to this conversation, and I know that you're just new in your tenure, but perhaps can you share with us your vision for the Nigerian entrepreneurship space? You're someone who before now has been a promoter of small and growing businesses, and so this I think will be a good opportunity for you to share your vision in line with some of the conversations that we have had on what will be your priorities with Smidan. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Firstly, let me apologize for coming late. Circumstances in my country, and also for technology issue. I hope I'm forgiven. Considering I was just invited. So, firstly, I think that the most important thing for us as Smidan is, you know how the architects will tell you, and even the Holy Book will tell you that you cannot be able to build without counting the cost. The first thing we want to almost immediately start to do is to do a small business census. If you look at statistics today, some statistics will tell you that 29 million small businesses, some will say there are 42 million small businesses. We do believe. But when you start to drill further and ask where the small businesses are located, that's what the problem is. So we have on paper 42 million small businesses, but we don't know where these businesses are. We don't know who they are. We don't know where they are located. We don't know what business they're doing, and even the problems that some of them are confronted with. So almost like that's what we want to begin to do, and I think that we will be calling on many of our partners here just to conduct that small business census. Because I think that when we have that small business census, then we can now have enough data to make informed decision. Then I can come to Google to say that I have 300,000 small businesses in Abeokuta, and then I want Google Skill Up Africa program for them. I can come to Stanley Bank and say, I need this product because of the peculiarities of the problems that these small businesses are confronted with. So almost make it, that's the first thing that we want to do as a business, but not oblivious of the fact that there are issues. Some of the issues are being discussed on this panel, and some of them we're already attacking as an agency, which is Enterprises Development Agency of Nigeria. Funny enough, a couple of people do not know what Smidan is, what Smidan knows. One of my best friends does not even know the agency existed. So I have some aides at the back who can give you some information if you're a small business. But we have these interesting products that we want to strengthen. So there's something that the Japanese started called One Village, One Product, OVOP. We have adopted that in Nigeria, and we are doing one product, one local government. So as an agency, we conducted a panoramic study of where our natural resources lie in Nigeria, and then we have mapped them to different local governments. So what we want to begin to do is to work with those local governments, work with the entrepreneurial community and the ecosystem of those local governments to harness those resources for local consumption and also for exports. So far, about 60,000 entrepreneurs have benefited from this program. What the program does is you get entrepreneurial training, you get vocational skill training, and then you get some form of working capital. So it's a 70% grant, sorry, 30% grant, 70% loan. And we're working with some financial institutions. Also, there's the conditional grant scheme, where we're going across Nigeria looking for small businesses, nano businesses, who 50,000 to 100,000 mean a lot to, and granting them that money on the basis that, on the condition that they will employ at least one person. So if we speak or engage at the 100,000 small businesses, almost immediately we're creating jobs for 200,000 people in society. So that's two. Then three, there's the fund matching that we're doing with commercial banks. And the problem that we are being faced with this is that a couple of small businesses are not harnessing or taking advantage of the fund matching, which means we bring a certain amount of money and commercial bank brings a certain amount of money, and then we can lend to you at a single digit interest rate. And from the report that I've got, I just want to make even though I've been in the ecosystem for over a decade, is that we have less than 100 people, 100 entrepreneurs who have accessed that. And I think that I will throw that to this room, even though we understand that the fundamental problem is structure, because the commercial banks who are getting the risk would not want to release the money. One of the things we're doing is to reduce that so that the small businesses can have access to the money, but also to encourage more people, because we do not have a lot of, I think we're doing a couple of things as a government, and we engage with my other panelists on other things that we can continue to do as government, because we cannot now continue to play government. Now the president has done a phenomenal thing, appointing someone from the ecosystem in office and making some other right appointments. Then we will begin to see some resultant changes. So I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to engage further. And again, this is not the argument kind of government. We are here about taking notes. I see one of the SSAs to the president on entrepreneurship here, Jennifer Timonso. So she's also young. She's also in the room. She's been engaging with me before I got in here. And then we were taking notes on how to engage in the ecosystem. Because really and truly, if you look at all the economies that developed, if you look at India, look at Japan, look at Indonesia, they all developed because they focus on the small businesses. We have 42 million of the small businesses in Nigeria. There's no reason why we cannot start to make concerted efforts to make this the giant of Africa like we say. So again, sorry for coming late.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm sure a lot of people here are looking forward to engaging with you and seeing how to help Smidan be efficient and effective to support a lot of our small and growing businesses and also help to improve their productivity. Please, do we have any questions? Yes. 1, 2, 3. Okay, we don't have any women asking questions. Sorry. So, sir in glasses, number 2, number 3, number 4. Please, do we have a roving mic?
Yes.
So, your name, your question, straight to the point, and who you would want to address.
Okay.
We will take all the questions at once, and then we'll respond at once and then round up. Thank you.
All right. Hello. Thank you very much. My question is to Mr.
Your name?
My name is David Nwachukwu, and my question is to Mr. Mbaozoku. Can you hear
Yes,
me?
please go ahead.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
All right. So my question is around education, and I wholeheartedly agree that we definitely need reform in our public university education system. But I have a question. Should we revert to the 6334 system where we prioritize TVET and technical education, especially integrating technology into that space? Because we have 500,000 to 600,000 graduates each year that don't have access to jobs, but they're coming out of the public university education system. What about the technical colleges? The UK and Germany are great examples of this, where not everyone is going to get a college degree. How can we be able to improve
Thank
this
you.
and restructure?
Thank you very much. Yes, the gentleman in the grey suit.
All right. Good afternoon, all. Great session. My name is Kingsley Bangwell. I'm a co-founder of the 100 Naira a Day School for out-of-school kids here in Abuja. So I'm so excited about the comments around education. I think there's something we're missing. I'm asking how we can see how the private sector actually can drive something that we need to do in education. There's a lot of conversation around government effort, and government is doing what it can. They are covering 83% of our kids in public secondary schools. But one of the things we've discovered is that we're not seeing enough private sector intervention in low-cost education, where we have majority of the children who are either going to school or not going to school. I want to really commend what Sterling Bank is doing with Sterling One Foundation and all of that. But how can we unlock this innovation in our public school and local schools, where we have the majority of young people who, when they graduate from secondary school, if they don't have resource to go to university, should also be ready skills that can all immediately begin to unleash their creativity. So the question is, how can we get the private sector to tap into making creativity a culture in our secondary schools?
And who do you want to answer that question?
Well,
we already have a question for Chinenye, so
yes.
Olu
So maybe it's Sterling Bank and Mr. Abu could talk to yes. Any other person. Yeah.
Olu, are you okay with this? Olu, would you like to respond to that? Fantastic. So the third gentleman, yes, please.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thanks. I've really enjoyed this session. And I'm also going to talk about education. I believe Fahid Olajide, I run Omnicom Solutions. I've been involved in youth education as a volunteer in many respects. And part of the problems that I've found out is technology. There is something inside those universities that we've not taken care of. The lecturers. So pump the money you want to pump in there now, okay? You will find out that without the right kind of people that are going to enlighten the students, we are still going to take a long time before we start to make the gains. I have a friend, I have friends that have been in the industry before going into lecturing, and I see how they do it, and I see the difference in what they impart in their students, and it's different. So how are we going to also make all of this, because we've been talking about the students, we've been talking about the money.
Quality, curriculum,
yes. How do we go inside that?
Fantastic.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We had one more at the back. Sorry, we can only take that one more with the. No, I think actually there's a gentleman in front. Yes. My apologies. We need to round up now. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll just be very quick. I'm Colonel Felix Alaita, retired. Mine is not really a question. It's more to do with the topic of the panel, which is fostering culture of innovation and creativity. For me, fostering culture starts at the grassroots. As a child, what are you taught? What access do you have? I have a personal experience where my first son, I bought him his first laptop when he was 4 years old. Today he's 18. He just finished secondary school, and he's already working as a computer expert. He doesn't need a university degree to get a job. He earns a lot of money. So the point being, I want to take what Chinenye said. There's an example that has already been done. A country took concerted effort to make devices available to all the population. What you get is a shift in your demand and supply curve immediately. We will have more people who are enlightened that can now come to those same schools to now foster your innovation. But if you don't have that at that grassroots level, you're going to have people who are going to get to those educational points where they are undertrained already coming, and then you're going to get what he mentioned, cram and submit, right? Now, I want to also, I want to also add that we have a paradigm shift coming next year. I don't know if you've heard about it. The Starlink internet access. It's coming to mobile devices. It's an opportunity for our government right now to tap into. It's not ours, granted, but if you provide those devices across, you can instantly uplift or upskill your population in a year. It's as simple as that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colin. Thank you. Sorry, we've taken all the questions we can take. We really need to round up. Thank you. Please, I will start with Chinenye, Olu, Obi. Can you give us closing remarks also in that regard? And then, Charles, if there's anything else, and then we'll ask the chair to round up. Thank you. A minute, please. Thank you.
Okay, so you're right, and you hit hit the nail on the head. The reality is that, and the uncomfortable reality is that the majority of the population will not go to university. So there's a metric, there's a number that actually stands out that says that a country's tertiary education system starts to impact its GDP when you have about 8% of that population actually holding tertiary degrees. And so the question for us really is, what do our numbers actually tell us? If we're actually graduating 500,000, the university system takes only about 30% of those who apply and has done so for the past 40 years. The university system itself also has graduated the same percentage of students all along. So how do you solve the problem? Two things we need to do about that, I would suggest, is that number one, we have kind of like degraded the tertiary TVET system and said this is for people who can't go to university and who are dumb, etc., etc. Whereas in these economies across the world, the bulk of the people who actually contribute GDP in the US, I think the US about 95% of the GDP is contributed by the SME sector. And these are small businesses that are largely technical and vocational by nature. And so for us, that is definitely where we need to go to. The problem is that technical and vocational education is to many magnitudes more expensive than general education. And so the investment that has to be made in that space is what frightens people off. So when you look at it and you say, again, the education system, there was a study done by the Federal Ministry of Education that said, when students get to JS3, they're supposed to, because you talk about 6234 systems, so I'm trying to answer that. So when students get to the JS3 level, right, the carrying capacity of senior secondary 1, which is the pathway to university, is 14% of the population in JS3, which means that of every 100 students who get to JS3, only 14 can actually enter university because that's the carrying capacity of the SS, of the senior secondary system. What we found though is that so 86% of the students will stop their education at JS3 and should go into the TVET system. And so when you look at the numbers, if you have 2 million at tertiary gross enrollment, you can do the calculation and say what should you actually have in TVET. And yet what we have is a complete reversal. 540,000 gross enrollment in TVET, 2 million in university. Where are the rest? They're on the streets, or they're at your home, or they're driving your car, and they're illiterate or not functionally equipped to actually make money for themselves. So you're right, we need to find a way of refocusing on that space and expanding it. And the way to go is probably this. We go back to the system and we go back to what we're called, we go back to system, stop producing these, we go back to comprehensive schools. Comprehensive schools means that children from primary all the way through to basic education and into junior secondary will be, and on to senior secondary will be taught not just general education, but they will graduate with a skill. At 14 years old, a child should be digitally literate, able to use spreadsheets and to make presentations and to communicate and to have all those 7 survivability skills that Tony Wagner refers to. But that child should also be equipped with at least one vocation that they can actually do from the age of 14. And that means that if we don't implement comprehensive education as a mandate across the entire education system, we're going to have a challenge. The question is, around that is, why not? If you look again at data, the data is saying out of 10 children who go into senior secondary 1, only 1 will graduate, will come out in senior secondary 3 with 5 credits without completion. So the transition rates were falling off so many children at that stage. So the system is literally failing. Now, on the public education side, this is where the challenge is. So as the public system was failing, the private education was picking up. So in some states, you have a preponderance of people in the private education system, but that is almost a disaster. Because in that number, you have places that you won't call the private schools, but they're not called private schools. Government needs to figure out how do you interface the private sector into the public sector. And if you look at our system, we don't even have charter schools. There's no legal framework to allow, and if you as a professional want to go and lecture in university, there's no room for you to become an adjunct professor. It's so difficult for you to do that. So we need to kind of like recreate this whole system. And like the models are already there, we know what to do. The lecturers will become increasingly redundant as we start to expand the opportunity for people to be trained anywhere in the world. You go to university and get a degree, your teacher was a teacher, a lecturer in Japan, not the guy sitting in the university that is next to you. So this is the challenge for us to reach and reskill an entire population. And again, and I'm sorry, or not so sorry, to sound like a broken record. There's only one way in which we can achieve this, at the pace and the scale that we require, and that is by a massive and pervasive deployment of technology, beginning with women.
Thank you. A round of applause for you.
The question was about private sector participation.
Yes.
And I'll just piggyback off what Chineye actually, like his last line there, on the importance of technology and training, right? When you look at the report that I cited, the Digital Spinners report, it talks about 175, so it's 3 trillion for all of those emerging countries in terms of GDP growth, but 175 billion year-on-year GDP growth just for Nigeria. Any business, any private business that's thinking about sustainable business growth, right, would be thinking, 10, how many years into the future? And for you to do that, you have to be making sure that the ecosystem thrives. So one of the things that we've done, since 2017, we've trained 5 million people in digital skills. And we're very conscious about the impact, not just the trade, not just the amount of money we're putting in, but what is the impact on the creation of jobs, right? I think this year I did an announcement together with the Office of His Excellency, the Vice President, and the President as well, 1.2 billion to train 20,000. And we're very focused on women, as he said, but we're also focused on the underserved, right? Because a lot of the time, all of this money is going to the places where people already have some level of skills. And it's important that you get more, but we want to make sure that we're also driving impact at scale for people who are underserved. Now, that's some of the stuff we've done. What is important is that we need to have concerted efforts where private sector is funding and investing towards a goal that we all agree on.
And we all contribute. That
we all contribute to. But then the question is, who's the convener? The government. Well, he said, Obi says NESG. It's government. It's government. We want to come into the room and have a conversation in terms of how we want to do stuff. And Sterling Bank is going to come. I know an MTN is going to come. I see it has an president. We then say, you know what, this is the goal. And everyone essentially is feeding and funding into that goal that we then measure. But the problem is, if you don't have that structure, what happens then is you do it for PR. Like a business will just do it to get a few stuff in the press, to look good, but then you're not measuring any impact and then there's no vision. So to answer your question, I think there can be more that the private sector has to do, but we do need a convener, an umpire of some sort. And I think there's some progress there now with NIPTA and the Ministry of Communications, with Dr. Positano driving this. Hopefully we can get more private sector participation to the table.
Thank you. So round up Obi and Charles, and then hand over to the chairman.
The chap who was talking about lecturers, I think it's funny, that's actually a very important issue, and really in essence that's an easy way to apply innovation, because the lecturers are fundamental. We were talking about learning by rote earlier, which we all know is a problem, and anybody who went through the Nigerian educational system was this whole issue of buying lecture notes and everything. So why don't we create digital platforms for the lecturers, bring them online, they can bring their content online, they can monetize it, and they can monetize it all the time. Immediately they're happy, they're part of an ecosystem, everybody's getting value. So I think it's about how we think about the problems and where the solutions are, because obviously we can sit here and complain and lay out the issues that everybody knows, but I think the solutions are also within grasp, right? And it is technology applied solutions. So I would like to say that about that. The only other thing I wanted to say was, remember the story, because wherever you go in the world, the story defines you before you even arrived. One of the things that happened with the explosion of our soft power, 20 years ago, anywhere you went, you were a lot of Nigerians, I used to say Nigerians were hiding in public. Are you Nigerian? What's your name? James. So yeah, you look like Shegun, but so they were hiding in public because this whole 419, all this stress. Now before you got there, the music got there, the fashion is there, even the jollof is there, well, my Ghana friends, no vex, but so the thing about it is we have something that can work, but we need to invest in it. You need to back it. You need to be intentional about it. Don't be random. Let's not be doing this thing we've been doing like, we're so happy this. No. These people need to be supported. Everything that has happened in spite of being Nigerian. It's like our football. We could have been #1 in the world, but aren't you tired of talking about potential? Let's just do it, right? That's the Nike phrase. Just do it.
Thank you. I think I can connect to the story. I think it was the year 2017. President Barack Obama had identified myself and about 16 other people, and we were transported to the U.S. Zero cost to us. So when we got there, in the class, 16 people. So we had people from Mongolia, Chile, Taiwan, and everyone was calling me the African Prince. I didn't get the story. I didn't get the memo. But I wasn't wearing Ankara. I wasn't looking like Jidena. I was trying to look Western like this. But I now put one on my friend and I asked him, what? Tell me the thing. And everybody, all 16 others of them, had gotten emails from one African prince saying that they have inheritance, that they need to bring money to Nigeria. I said that to say this. We understand that some people that have gone before us have damaged our reputation, and it's the same with I don't know if many of you know freelancer.com. One of the things that we're doing right now, before now we had an engagement with the Australian ambassador, is freelancer.com is one of the biggest freelancer platform, and we saw that some Nigerians are not getting as much work that they should be getting because Nigerians before them had damaged their reputation. So we understand the story, we know the problem, but I can assure you that it's a new day for us in Nigeria. Although we are looking for a convener, we are the conveners for SMED and everything small business ecosystem. We are here and we're here to help. And we're here to help because we're not just paying lip service to these things. We've started to do the work. And then I can assure you that by the time we convene here next year for the NASG, we'll have measurable goals. So it's not just like PR. We can show you how many small businesses are now using technology to grow their businesses. We'll be able to show you how many businesses we have gotten from nano to micro, from micro to small, from small to medium. And then everything that we're doing right now, we're going to use technology to drive it. I think that's about education. Before now, I founded a company called SM100 Africa. And one of the things that we did is we wanted to start entrepreneurship education at teenage level. Because I started my first business at 17, and since I started that, I've never looked back on entrepreneurship. But we tested it with a few secondary schools. So we entered the schools and we started something called an entrepreneurship clubs, just like you had the debate society and the art society. And the reception was amazing. So I'm just saying that whatever it is that we can do with that as well, in terms of using education, using technology to drive that, especially with the public schools, I think that is our doors are open. Coco. So thank you so much for having me. Thank you for having me.
Over to you, our chairman.
Okay, Nike, you specifically want me not to summarize the day, so I'm going to try not to do that. Instead, I'll share a couple of experiences, and I'll start with something positive. The work that the NASG did with academia and industry to try and reform tertiary education using the triple helix model has actually led to some very positive outcomes that would, in a way, leverage on all of the conversation today. I happen to sit on the board of trustees of two of the universities that came out of that process. One of them is MIVA University, which is the first distant learning university that was licensed. And to understand this, up until then, the NUC had actually didn't have a framework either for transnational education or for distant learning. The only one we had was the National Open University. So some good news there. I think that the very first layer for using technology at the tertiary institution has been laid, and that's one thing to talk about. The second comment I'll make is that there was this comment on fiscal and monetary policy. And I think as a people, we need to understand what government fiscal and monetary policy means. It is what creates the relative advantage between us as a country and the next country. Period. Everything in macroeconomic policy is supposed to create a relative advantage. It is clear from the outcome that we have with the exchange rate and a couple of other things that we did not create a relative advantage for the country with our previous policy. Any policy going forward that does not make it easier for me to produce and easier for me to export and more difficult for me to import what can be produced is not helping the country. So I do appreciate that that point was raised. There were conversations around financing all of this, and I'm glad that I'm not a panelist, so I wasn't required to answer it. But I have something to say. A good education is an investment. In fact, it's one of the highest yielding investment in the world. Therefore, it must pay for itself. It means that the value you create by putting $1,000 into a student creates so many multiples of that you should be able to get the $1,000 back so that you can put into another student. We must understand the concept of education as an investment. I jokingly said to someone that if I sold $500 million worth of our LNG holding and I trained 250,000 Nigerians at the cost of $2,000 per person, the diaspora flow that will come within 3 years of that will be more than the $500 million. We have to start to think of why are you holding a low cost, a low yield investment when you can have a high yield investment? Why are you investing in resources when you can invest in people? We do need to create the enabling environment to convert innovation outside technology and the creative industry. The reason why technology and creative industry can continue to grow without us is that they do not need to have the ecosystem for converting innovation to products. It's not just the absence of government, it is the fact that they can thrive without a vibrant manufacturing system that makes those places happen. So if we want to see innovation outside those two sectors, you got to have energy as a baseline, but you also got to have a system that operates outside the existing ways of thinking and doing business by the Nigerian public servant. On the average, they have not been prepared to enable small businesses to thrive. I was talking to the Undersecretary of Treasury in the US recently, and I said, tell Mr. President that there is a concrete ceiling for SMEs. SMEs do not want to be anything but SMEs, because the consequences of becoming a formalized business was too much. Break that concrete ceiling by removing all of the cost of formalization. Then SMEs can now create employment beyond where they are now. I also think that the role of infrastructure cannot be, you cannot be competitive without it. No matter how innovative you are, if you don't have the infrastructure, even for logistics, for moving goods from one location to the other, then your innovation does not translate into a competitive output and you cannot export it. So infrastructure is something we cannot ignore. And finally, I think everyone is saying the same thing here. Education cannot be what happens in the four walls of universities. Education has to be what happened where you are, whenever you are, wherever you are. We have experimented in Sterling Bank, what we call Grow with Sterling, where we take kids who have just come out of secondary school and we put them admit them into the online universities that we work with. We work with MIVA now, we work with Nextford, and a couple of others coming up. Then they start to come to work as intern. So they start to earn. They start to earn enough to actually take care of themselves. We would give them the scholarship because we were experimenting, the first 50. But even without scholarship, with $2,000, you can educate a child to get what I think is a superior quality of education through 3 years of university. We've tested it, we've hired them, and they're incredibly good. But most importantly, because they would have spent 3 years in the workplace, they have far more than just the work that they've learned, right? And so therefore, how do we move from 2 million to 10 million students? Every single workplace is a micro campus in waiting. Technology connects them to the information, it connects them to the faculty. The question around what do we do about the lecturers? The average lecturer today is impacting 200, 300, 500 students. With technology, the average lecturer can impact 10 times as much. So first of all, take the really good lecturers, change the scale, right? The ratio of lecturer to student, and before you know it, you're out of here. But I must round up by thanking Charles for making it. I would have been gutted if you hadn't made it. And the reason is that most innovation today is happening in the SME space. And why it happening in the SME space is that they actually have no alternative but to innovate. The large corporate can continue to exploit the opportunities they have, and therefore they are not as motivated to innovate. Everything we do, therefore, we must bring it down to the entrepreneur at the individual. The same way everything in America was started in a garage. We don't have garages, but we'll have a few stores and shops and roadsides. Let's turn them to ecosystem for innovation. So again, thank you all very much. It's really been grateful.
A fantastic round up by our chair. Thank you very much to our audience members. I really do want to encourage all of us to be very involved, because what happens between the summit and the Nigerian Economic Summit Group is taking all these policy recommendations and then drilling them down at policy commissions, roundtables, and community of practice levels. It's not a talk shop, and I can say that from experience. And I want to encourage and invite you to the Digital Economy Policy Commission, the Creative Economy Policy Commission, to the MSME Policy Committee of Practice. There's so many sectors and industry roundtables, working groups that need you, need your perspective, need you to challenge us, and more importantly, get this policy to act. Like Chineye said, let's act. There's a lot of thinking, there's a lot of thought out there. There's a lot of research that already exists in the place, but we need all of us here, private, public, development sector, working in partnership together. Thank you all, and enjoy the rest of the summit. Thank you.
Listen to everybody when they finish.